mistake of watching that video again in the first service, and it took me a few minutes to recover, so I did not watch it this time. But at the end, man, when she takes that picture off the wall and there's that little thing, it's hard to deal with. And I think especially for me, I have 3 kids that are in different parts of those phases, and maybe you watched that video and you connected with it probably a little differently than I did, or maybe the same, where maybe you pictured yourself, you remembered your room growing up and how it changed, or maybe you remember your kids' rooms and how they changed over time, or your grandkids. But all of us can connect with that video, and it's amazing how in that video it shows just how quickly it does pass. And you always say that until you start to experience it. They just move so quickly. And so today we're talking about family, and specifically we're talking about how we have influence in our family as adults. And we're going to look at what our family actually means. What does it mean? How do we define our family? And when we talk about the word family, for some of us, that gives us different emotions. I was fortunate. I'm blessed. I grew up in a great Christian home. We went to church. My parents are still married. We were, middle class, which, I got things I wanted, but not everything that I wanted, and we were able to do things, and I was very fortunate. But for some people, family is not a great word. You didn't have a great situation growing up. You don't have a great experience. And so when you hear that word family, we all have different emotions attached to it. And that's just part of life, and that's normal. But today, as we talk about family, what I'm honing on is our influence that we have on our kids, but not just our kids, other kids. So if you're saying, hey, Brant, I don't have kids, I've never had kids, or my kids are grown, that's all right, because you can still think back to the point where you were a kid. Maybe some of you still act like a kid. But all of you know at least one kid. Maybe that is yours. Maybe you're like me and have a couple. But if you don't, you have a friend who has a kid. Or maybe you've got nieces or nephews or a cousin, or just in your neighborhood there are kids. If you come to church here, you have to know at least one kid. And I believe that kids and families are a priority. And so today, as we talk about this message, it is geared towards our interaction as adults with kids, but it's also relatable to our external families. And what I mean by that is this, is that Jesus, when he was on earth, he talked to us and he said that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves, which means we're to love everyone. And a part of that is basically we are to see everybody as family. We're to love our family. We're to love the people that are around us as family. So the people that we work with, the people that we do life with, the people that are on our maybe we're on a sports team, people that are just a part of our neighborhood, we should see them all as family. And the reason we should do that is because when we see them as a family, we want them to succeed. Hopefully you want everybody in your immediate family to succeed. And when we view them in this lens of family, it changes our perspective. It makes it more personal. And so if you're going to have influence on whether it's your God-given family or your external family, there's a couple things that we need to do. In order to do that, first is you have to have influence. And the best way to have influence, the number one way to have influence, is to start by showing up. You have to actually be present in order to make an impact. If you want to grow in your faith, you have to show up. You have to read your Bible. You have to pray. You need to come to church. You need to be challenged by other people in order to grow in your faith. If you want to succeed in a job, you have to actually do the job. I've never heard of anyone being a great employee that never showed up to work. If you want a relationship with other people, or maybe eventually you want a husband or a wife, you actually have to show up around that person in order for the friendship to grow. And if you want a relationship with your kids or with your grandkids or with other kids, then you have to be where they are. You have to show up where they are, where they live, in order to have access to them. Now that seems pretty easy, right? It's pretty basic. I didn't come up with any big thought here, but here's the problem, and here's why it's difficult even for me as a dad. why it's difficult, why it keeps me from always showing up when I should show up. And that's because this type of showing up doesn't always get immediate results, especially when it comes to our own family. Think about it like this. If you had toddlers or you've worked with toddlers, I've never, at least this was true with my toddlers, and they're all past that, none of them ever thanked me for disciplining them. None of them ever thanked me for teaching them how to use the bathroom. None of them ever said, thanks for feeding me today or wiping my nose. It just doesn't work like that. Toddlers are not at a place where they have learned how to say thank you. And then they get to middle school, and it's not a whole lot different than toddlers sometimes. And so maybe they mumble a thank you to you after you've been to the store and bought them some expensive clothes or something they really wanted. But I've never had in my own kids, or even with the kids I work with, none of them have ever pulled me aside and taken me for a coffee or a Meliella and said, hey, here's a list of all the ways that you have made my future better. Kids just don't do that. And I'm in a unique position where I have my own kids, but I also have all these kids here at church that I have watched grow up. When I first got here, Sawyer and Mitchell, they were 3 or 4 years old. And now both of them are at the point where they're getting their driver's permits and starting to drive. And so I get to watch a lot of kids grow up, which is a great thing, but it can also be frustrating. Like this as a parent, it also is as a minister, because they don't always get what we're teaching. They don't always demonstrate what we're teaching, because we as adults, we have this experience, we have this life experience, we have this knowledge that we know if you would just listen to us, that your life would be better a lot sooner than it was for us. But they don't do that. Why? Because we didn't do it either. Because they're still learning and they're still growing and they're still having to kind of make some of their own experiences. But I do see that over time, they begin to take on the things that you teach them and the things that I teach them. Sometimes it takes some kids a lot longer than others, but almost always they do begin to do that. And the chances are the fact that you are here this morning, that you're in this church, that somebody, somewhere along the way, invested in you. That they took the time to get to know you, to invest in you, even though they did not see immediate results. I'm sure you didn't do all the things that they wanted you to do when you wanted them to do them. But they didn't give up. They kept showing up. And as a result, you are here today. See, the best kind of influence that we can have is personal. And if we look to Jesus as the example, as we do for all things, Jesus showed us this example several times in the Bible. One is that he went to Zacchaeus, and he said, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house today. Now that's personal, because he didn't give Zacchaeus any warning. There was no chance to go clean and get everything put away. He said, I'm coming to your house. I'm going to see where you live. And I don't care what it looks like, I'm coming. And he went to his house. He made it personal. Jesus said to Peter, to Andrew, and James, he said, come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men, fishers of people. He made it personal. No longer are you doing this, we're going after people, because it matters. And then to the woman at the well, he said, you know what? It's okay. I know that you don't have a husband, but I still love you. I know that you're making mistakes, but I still love you anyway. Jesus made it personal. He showed up in the places that people were at, in the phases of life that they were in, and he loved them where they were. He showed it in a personal way, and because of that, he earned a different kind of influence. Now, sometimes we confuse power with influence, right? If you are a boss at work, or maybe not the top boss, but a boss, you have influence on other people. You can tell people what to do, and they have to do it, or they don't get to work anymore, right? You have a toddler, a 3-year-old, you can tell them what to do, and ultimately, they will do it. And you have power over them, but that power doesn't last forever, because that's not the kind of influence that lasts forever. When I was in high school, I must have been a junior or senior. We were having a family get-together. I don't know if it was a holiday or what, but I was tasked with going to pick up my great-grandmother. Well, my great-grandmother lived about an hour away from where we did, so I got in my Chevy Blazer, and I headed up the road to go get her. And I picked her up, and I was coming back, and it's interstate, basically in South Carolina, to get to her all the way back, interstate. And as I get off of my exit, and I'm taking my roads to go to my grandma's house, I find that there's a policeman behind me, and his lights are running. And so I pull over, and he comes up, and he tells me that I was doing 70 in a 55 on the interstate, which I cannot really confirm whether I was doing that or not. I do know my great-grandmother was sitting next to me, so I think there's probably a likelihood that I was not going that. But, needless to say, he asked me to get out of the car. And so I got out of the car. Now, in today's world, you would take your phone and you'd turn it on and you'd start camera him and say, "Sir, I have the right not to get out of the car." But back then, I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that now. But I got out of the car because he had power. He took me around to the back of the car, and he starts talking to me and asking me questions, and I put my hands in my pocket. And he said, "Sir, please take your hands out of your pocket." I said, "Yes, sir." Hold back in my pocket. Well, he keeps asking me questions. I put my hands back in my pocket. He says, "Sir, take your hands out of your pocket." "Yes, sir." Yes, sir. He says, "Are you nervous?" I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's my great-grandma in the car, and you got me behind the car. I'm very nervous." And so eventually I think he realized, I don't know what really happened. Honestly, I think he pulled over the wrong person. But he let I didn't get a ticket or anything, and he let me go after he grilled me of where I was going. And so I don't know what happened, but it was crazy. But he had power over me because to me he was an authority, and so I did what he did. I was respectful, and so I followed his things, and it worked out for me, and I got to go. But his power was different than influence. He just had power in the moment. And then the worst part of the story is that we get to my grandma's house, and my great-grandma goes on inside, and I think I was playing with my cousins or something. But then when I walk in the house, immediately my mom says, "So, you got a ticket?" I was like, "Oh, Joe, you got pulled over." And I was like, "Thanks, great-grandma. I mean, we couldn't even, you just sold me out. Like thought we had a bond. I picked you up." Anyway, we move on. So there's power. There's also, we believe, sometimes we confuse success with influence because we're successful at work. Maybe we're a successful manager, or we're successful in our office, or people actually call us to consult with us. Or maybe we just we run our household really well. And so we think that people should listen to us because we're smart, because other people do. And that does work in some places, but it doesn't work in our homes, because our kids and kids that we want to have influence over, they honestly don't really care what we do at work. They don't understand what we do at work. They don't understand influence that we have. And that doesn't matter to them, because our success at work does not mean success at home. Our influence is not based on our success. It's based on our presence. See, there's several different kinds of influence, and one we talked about was power. There's also authority. But really, the one we want is trust. See, the first two types, power and authority, they're common. They're easy, but they're ultimately temporary. But that third kind, trust, it's the kind of influence that has to be earned. And it should be earned. Influence needs to be earned. If you want to have influence in your son's life, if you want to have influence in your nephew's life, in your stepdaughter's life, you have to care enough to show up in a personal way. You have to show up where they are to earn that influence. And I'm going to show you why this works. There's a guy in the Bible, and you probably heard of him. His name is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is very famous in the Christian world for leading the charge of rebuilding the massive wall that was around Jerusalem. And the wall for Jerusalem represented so many things. It represented stability. It represented protection for the city. It represented the city's strength. And so here they are in the middle of a project. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I get in the middle of projects and they are not going the way I expected. I think a project's going to take an hour, and here I am 2 hours in, and I'm not quite done. And I've had to make several trips to Lowe's, and I thought I had it all the first time, and so just frustrated. And that's kind of where they were, except on a much more massive scale. They're trying to build this wall, and they're having all these issues, and they're like halfway, and they're at a critical point, and things are starting to unravel. When people are they're tired of building. They probably thought, we should be done with this by now. And because of that, everything began to pile up. There began to be verbal attacks. They were attacking the leadership. There were threats from outside. There was skepticism. Can we even finish this project? I'm sure there were complaints. There's always complaints. There were rumors of things. And so here they are. Morale is starting to shift on this wall, and there's an enemy right outside the gates waiting to attack them. And Nehemiah does something just genius that I believe is inspired by God. He rallied families and parents to assume a new level of responsibility. And this is what he did. So listen to this scene again. They're halfway through it. Nehemiah 4, verses 10 through 15. It says, "Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, 'The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall.' Also our enemies said, 'Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work.' Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, 'Wherever you turn, they will attack us.' Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes.' When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot, and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work." So imagine you are there, and you know that the enemy is about to attack, and you haven't finished building, and there's this daunting task before you. And Nehemiah, who I again believe was inspired by God, organized them by families. And he says, remember what you are fighting for. You're not just fighting to rebuild this wall. You're fighting for your family. You're fighting for your sons. You're fighting for your daughters, your husbands, your wives, your homes, the future. And when the parents stood in the gaps, when the parents stood out to defend, the enemies decided not to attack. And I think there's a reason for that. You hear soldiers, I've never been a soldier, but you hear when you see the stories that they always talk about fighting for their brothers on their left or their right because they all want to come home. Well, imagine if it was your actual brother standing next to you that you were fighting for. Or your son or a daughter or your mom or your father, they're actually there. How much more would you fight? Just think about in your own lives, what are you willing to do for your kids, for your grandkids, or maybe even kids that you have already developed a relationship for? I would suspect you're willing to do just about anything to make them succeed. And so when the parents stood in the gaps, the enemy decided not to attack, because they knew that parents fight differently when it's for their own children. And so when you're looking at the faces of your family, know that there is an enemy out there, and we have to fight differently. When you're choosing to invest in children, know that there's an enemy out there, and you have to fight differently. And the same is true of our external families, people that we want to invest in. They are worth the investment. And so the wall went on to be built, and Jerusalem thrived, and it was all because the parents showed up. So as parents, as grandparents, as aunts, uncles, friends, and ultimately members of the body of the Christ, we need to stand in the gap for upcoming generations. We need to put ourselves on the front line and put ourselves in their shoes so that we can get to know them, so that we can make it personal, so that we can have influence on them. And in order to know them, we've got to be around them and ask them. And so when we look at kids, when we think back to kids, probably most of us, even myself as 44 years old, I don't remember much about being a preschooler. But it's important to know preschoolers if you want to make an impact on them. Did you know that a preschooler takes 75 more steps per minute than an adult? Which is why we have to walk slowly with preschoolers. But most of the time we think preschoolers, they're asking us to pick them up. They're just being lazy. they don't want to walk. But the reality is they're actually working 75 times more harder than you are. And that's why they want to get picked up, because they're tired. Or when we get to elementary school, I do remember some about elementary school. I remember a few of my teachers. I remember soccer. But I don't remember a whole lot else. And I definitely don't remember that about second grade is when the comparison crisis kicks in. Is when you actually start to realize the things that you can do, and you compare them against things that other people can do. And you begin to judge yourself. Where do I stand up in my class? Where do I stand up in my grade? And that begins in second grade. And they've actually found that it's better actually at that age for girls to be around girls and boys to be around boys, because they thrive better in those circumstances. And then many of us, we just blocked out middle school. We don't want to think about that. That was a scary time. But did you know that a middle schooler loses a third of their cerebral cortex in a process called pruning? So if you've ever had to work with middle schoolers, or maybe you remember your middle schoolers, and you kept saying, "Don't you remember this? We just talked about it." And you're like, "Are you losing your mind?" Yes, they're actually losing their mind. Part of it is it's disappearing. So with a middle schooler, we have to remember that it's okay, that we have to repeat ourselves. And instead of getting mad, we just say, "Hey, how can I help?" And then high school is a little different for all of us, because we probably remember high school a little bit better, or at least we think we do. And if there's a time that I could go back in my life, high school would be it, or maybe college, because it was a great time. Like, there were no bills. There was no real responsibility. I had to go to school. I had to get my work done. I had to do a little bit of work from some yard work. I got to play soccer. It was just a great time if I could go that. And so we think back to our high school things, and we think, oh, I can relate to high school kids. And there are certain things that we can relate to. There are timeless things that high schoolers go through. But don't for a second think that your experience in high school, my experience in high school, is anything like their experience in high school. I said earlier, my son is 15-year-old, my oldest. He's never lived in a world without an iPhone. He does not know that world. And so their world is more connected than it has ever been. So they are going through things that we never had to go through. And so I tell you these things about people because we need to know about people. And so it's not just about knowing our kids, but anybody that we want to have influence on, we've got to get to know them. We can't just expect them to think that they're just like us, that they have the same experiences that we are. We have to know them. And we've got to do that in order to be an influence. And so no matter your age, you have leverage to help the generations below you. And as Christ calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves, to think of everyone as families, it means that we should be helping and investing in others, in those that are coming up and in those that are around us. And again, it's about getting to know people. It's about making it personal with them. And so today I want to leave you with two challenges about making it personal. The first is to take a look at the groups around you and begin to see them, the people that you hang out with. And stop seeing them as friends, as co-workers, or just as church members, but see each other as family. Because we want our family to succeed. And as Christians, we should want everyone to succeed. We should want them all to know Christ personally. And in order to do that, we've got to be an influence in their life. And in order to be an influence in their life, we've got to show up in personal ways. We've got to get to know them. I was in seminary, and I was working part-time at a church doing recreation. And we had a golf tournament scheduled one day. More like a golf outing, not really a tournament. And so I was driving down to where it was about 45 minutes away. And I got to my office, and it had kind of been cloudy that morning. But by the time I got to my office, it wasn't bad. So I called the golf course, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm getting ready to come over. Just want to check on things." And he told me it's been canceled for the day. And I was like, "It's been canceled?" And there's another gentleman who was a member of this golf course, and we've been working together. And they told me that he had canceled it. He just canceled it for the day. And I was very angry. I was still young, so I was very angry. And I remember throwing something in my office. That's how upset I was. And so there wasn't this, there were no cell phones back then. And so I just didn't get a hold of him, and so I didn't talk to him. I didn't try to call him. I was mad. So I at least knew not to do that. The next day in church, I remember very vividly, it's kind of like a church like this, and he's sitting over on the right, and I saw him before church, so I went over to talk to him. And in our conversation, obviously, I didn't realize that it was happening, but I got emotional, and I must have raised my voice some. And we had the conversation, and I just left frustrated. And the next day, my pastor came to me and said, hey, you need to call them, and you need to go over there, and you need to apologize. And he was right, and I had done wrong. So I called them, and I go to their house. And when I got there, what I was expecting is not what happened. They weren't even mad at me. They weren't angry at me. They wanted me to succeed. And they wanted to just talk about what happened because they knew I was going to be a minister. And they knew things were going to happen. And they wanted me to do better. And so I apologized, and they talked to me about it, and we had a great conversation. It was not at all what I expected, but they weren't angry. I'm sure they didn't like the situation, but they saw it as a way to invest in me. And I came away from that a better person. I'd like to say I never got angry again, but that's not true. But they invested in me. They took that opportunity. And the second thing I challenge you is that to invest in the generations below you. If you have kids in your house or grandkids, you have a great place to start. Start with them. If you don't have any, then look around. Do you have any in your neighborhood? Do you have anybody that's of your friends that you can invest in their kids? And then if you look around and you can't find any, come find me. There are a bunch of kids here. You can start investing in some of them. Ask God to show you 2 or 3 kids that maybe really need some investment. Maybe they don't have the abilities, or their families aren't as good, and you can provide some influence on them that they don't have at home. I would even ask that if you have kids, that you would begin to pray that God would put other adults in their lives that will invest in them. Because I know as a dad, I need multiple people investing in my kids. I can't do it alone. But you've got to be willing to show up consistently and get to know them. And when you do that, God will take care of the rest. Now, we as humans are selfish, myself included. And a lot of times it's easier for me just to say, oh, I'm tired right now, or I've got these other things to do when my kids come and ask me. But part of my prayer is that God remind me every time they ask me to put those selfish things away and to go and be an influence on them. And I pray that for you as well. It's harder to do it because it takes more work, but that's what we're called to do, to have influence. And if we want those around us to succeed, if we want the next generations to know Christ and to be better people, then we have got to invest in them. And we've got to invest in them over time. So today, as you're sitting here today, I hope that you will continue to invest in people that you are. If there's no one that you're investing in, that you will look out and you will go find some kids to invest in. If you need some help in investing, you're not sure where to start, give me a call. I'd love to do that. If you're, there's also that little our visitors thing on there. You can write at the bottom, Brant, I'd like some more information on how I can invest in the generations. Fill that out. Drop it in the offering plate. Or maybe you're in here today and maybe you chose to visit us and you're like, I don't know much about this relationship with God. I'd like to know more about it. Take that card as well and mark it, and we will give you a call and have a conversation and talk to you. But ultimately, where do you need to apply what you've learned today, whether it's from this message, whether it's from music? How can you walk out of here with something that you can apply to your life as a Christian that will make you better and to further the kingdom of God? Will you join me as I close in prayer? Father, we are so fortunate to be able to be here this morning and to worship you and to praise your name and to lift you up. And God, we ultimately thank you for being all of our fathers, the greatest father that we could ever have. And we thank you for showing up in our lives, and know that even though we cannot see you physically, Father, I know and feel your presence constantly in my life. I see how you are at work at all the times when I am looking for it. I see your presence. And God, I thank you for being a personal God who knows me and loves me and wants to have influence on me. And God, I pray that you continue to allow me to have the heart to be influenced. And God, I pray that you would also help each of us as we go out to be people of influence, to be people that want to help others succeed, to help our families succeed, to help those around us succeed, and ultimately that they would know you as their personal Savior, because that is the greatest success in life. And God, right now, I just pray that you would be with us this week. Watch over us and guide us. In your name I pray. Amen.